In January 2019, a company that did nothing more glamorous than rent out desks was valued at $47 billion. By November 2023, the entire company was worth roughly $44 million. That is a loss of over 99.9%, one of the most complete destructions of value in the entire history of business, and almost nobody saw it coming. The company was WeWork, and the story you have probably heard goes something like this. A charismatic founder named Adam Neumann promised to elevate the world's consciousness through wild parties, burned through cash, and a single disastrous IPO filing took the whole thing down. That story is dramatic. It is also not quite the truth. Here is what really happened. WeWork was never truly a tech company. It was a real estate company wearing a tech valuation like a costume. And one document, filed in August 2019, ripped that costume off in front of the entire world. To understand why it fell so hard, you have to understand what WeWork actually sold and what it pretended to be. So let's start with the business. WeWork rented office space. That is it. Not software, not a platform, not a network with flywheel effects. It took big floors of offices, made them look beautiful, and rented them out by the desk, by the month. A perfectly ordinary real estate business wrapped in the language of a Silicon Valley unicorn. Here is the model in a single sentence. WeWork signed long-term leases, sometimes committing for up to 15 years, with landlords. Then it sublet that exact same space, one desk at a time, on terms as short as a single month. Long-term obligations on one side, short-term cancelable revenue on the other. That mismatch is the entire story. It was a simple bet, and for a long time it looked like a brilliant one. WeWork was betting that commercial rents would keep climbing year after year, and that members would keep showing up to fill the desks. If both held true, the spread between what it paid landlords and what it charged members would pour out as profit. A pure real estate arbitrage, dressed up as a movement. And for a while, the bet looked genius. WeWork expanded into city after city, country after country, until it became the largest private office tenant in all of Manhattan. It held more square footage of prime office space than the big banks. The growth curve was so steep and the branding so seductive that investors stopped asking what was underneath it. WeWork called its renters a community. It called its buildings a platform. It described renting a desk as a lifestyle. It talked exactly like a fast-growing tech company, and so its investors priced it like one. The higher the valuation climbed, the more the costume felt real, and the fewer people wanted to look underneath. The single biggest believer was Masayoshi Son, the billionaire founder of SoftBank. Son loved big, bold bets on founders who dreamed enormous dreams. He met Adam Neumann, decided within minutes that he was the next great visionary, and wrote the checks that made WeWork's valuation feel real, at least on paper. In January 2019, SoftBank put in another $2 billion. That single private investment valued WeWork at $47 billion. Pause on that number. It was not set by 1,000 buyers in a public market. It was set by one investor agreeing to pay one price, one time. Nobody else ever validated it. It was SoftBank's number, and SoftBank's alone. Then, in August 2019, WeWork filed the paperwork to go public. The document is called an S1, and it is the moment everything changed. Because an S1 does not let you keep talking like a visionary, it forces you to show your numbers, your risks, and your debts in black and white to the public. And the numbers were brutal.
The S1 laid the business completely bare. WeWork carried $47 billion in future lease obligations. Think about that. $47 billion owed to landlords over the coming years, set against members who could walk away almost any time. Even the SEC itself flagged $33.9 billion in non-cancelable commitments, asking the company to display them as prominently as its revenue. And the losses were staggering. In 2018, WeWork lost $1.6 billion on $1.8 billion in revenue. Read that again. For every dollar it pulled in the door, it lost almost as much. In just the first half of 2019, it actually burned through more cash than it earned in revenue. Every new desk it added made the hole deeper. But the scary numbers were only half of the story. The S1 also revealed how the founder had quietly treated the company as his own personal piggy bank. The conflicts of interest were not hidden in a footnote. They were laid out in plain sight, and they were breathtaking. WeWork paid $5.9 million to an entity owned by its own CEO, Adam Neumann, simply for the right to use the word "we," the name of his own company. He had sold the trademark back to himself, and the company he ran had paid him for the privilege. After the backlash, he returned the money, but the fact that it happened at all told investors everything. And there was more. Neumann had personally bought buildings, then leased them back to the very company he ran, collecting rent from his own shareholders. He took out roughly $700 million in personal loans backed by his WeWork shares. He held voting control so concentrated that outside investors had almost no meaningful say in how the company was run. The valuation chart tells the rest of the story at a glance. $16 billion in 2016, $20 billion in 2017, $47 billion at the peak in January 2019, and then a near vertical cliff. The greatest single number in the whole saga is how fast it all came apart once the lights were turned on. Investors read that S1 and ran for the exits. The same institutions that had lined up to buy shares suddenly wanted nothing to do with it. On September 17, 2019, WeWork withdrew its IPO. The $47 billion valuation, which had taken years and billions of SoftBank dollars to build, evaporated in a matter of weeks. Days later, Neumann was pushed out as CEO and stripped of his majority voting control. The company he had built was burning through roughly $1 billion in cash every 6 months, with no clear path to profitability, and running out of road fast. The costume was off and the bills were due. SoftBank had no choice but to ride in with a rescue. It put together a $9.5 billion package, took about 80% ownership of the company, and valued the whole thing at roughly $8 billion, down from $47 billion in just 9 months. Even SoftBank's own internal valuation later dropped as low as $4.9 billion. And here is the part that still stings even years later. To get Neumann to step aside quietly, SoftBank handed him roughly $1.7 billion in shares, consulting fees, and loan credits. The man who presided over one of the greatest collapses in business history walked away richer than the vast majority of people will ever be in their entire lives. WeWork limped on. It laid off 2,400 people, about 20% of its staff. It eventually went public through a back door, a SPAC merger, in 2021 at a $9 billion valuation. The market barely shrugged. The tech costume was gone, the community story was dead, and nobody believed the future WeWork was selling anymore.
By November 2023, the share price had fallen to 84 cents. The total market cap was about $44 million. WeWork filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing liabilities somewhere between $10 and $50 billion. The company that had once been worth $47 billion could no longer pay its own rent. The arbitrage had finally broken. As for SoftBank, which had bet roughly $16 billion on WeWork in total across equity, debt, and bailouts, it wrote most of it off. The saga is said to have cost Masayoshi Son $11.5 billion of his own personal money and a great deal of his credibility. He later admitted plainly that the investment had been a mistake. So what really killed WeWork? Not the IPO filing, not the pandemic, which arrived months later and only made things worse. Not even Adam Neumann, though he poured gasoline on absolutely everything he touched. The real killer was the business model itself, the thing hiding underneath the costume the whole time. WeWork died of long-term leases stacked against short-term members, a real estate arbitrage that only worked if rents rose forever, members never left, and cash kept flowing in to cover the gap. The moment any of those assumptions cracked, the entire structure was doomed. And eventually, all of them cracked at once. The $47 billion valuation was a fiction that a single investor had agreed to believe. The S1 did not create the flaw. It did not invent the lease mismatch or the losses or the self-dealing. All of that was already there. The S1 just turned on the lights so that everyone in the room could finally see it. And that is the pattern running through this entire series. Toys R Us was buried under debt it could never escape. Sears was stripped for its parts piece by the very man supposed to save it. Each one a giant brought down from within.
WeWork put a real estate business inside a tech costume and called it the future of how we work. In every one of these stories, the very thing that made the company great, its debt, its assets, its certainty, its branding, became the trap that sank it. The moat becomes the grave. If a business ever looks too good to be priced, read the fine print. The numbers are always in there, hiding in plain sight, in black and white, waiting for someone to bother turning on the light. The truth about every empire is written down somewhere. Most people just never bother to read it. I make a new documentary like this every single week, uncovering the rise, the fall, and the secrets behind the world's biggest businesses. Subscribe to Paper Empire, and I will see you in the next one.